Welcome to Talking Supply Chain. In each episode, top supply chain industry professionals and the nation's top thought leaders join host Brian Strait and share their unique insights to help supply chain managers stay one step ahead of their competition. This is Talking Supply Chain. E-commerce has slowed, but make no mistake, it's still growing. Supply chain disruptions continue, forcing companies to rethink just-in-time inventory management. Inflation continues to impact business of all types, and industrial vacancy rates have remained below 10% for several years now. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Talking Supply Chain. I'm your host, Brian Strait, and I'm pleased you have joined us today. Today, we're going to dive into some of these topics and some of the trends in supply chain and the logistics space. And joining us to do that is Brandon Page, Executive Vice President, Head of Leasing and Customer Solutions for Link Logistics. Brandon, welcome to the Talking Supply Chain podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Great. I'm glad you're here with us. To get started and get our audience familiar with you guys, many of out there are probably familiar with Link Logistics, but there's probably some that maybe are not. So can you give us a little insight to get started on who Link Logistics is and what you guys kind of do?
Yeah, absolutely. Link was established in 2019 by Blackstone as their U.S. industrial real estate platform. So we have nearly 500 million square feet of buildings. We serve over 10,000 customers in over 3,000 buildings. And so it's a really substantial U.S. only portfolio to the scale of the tune of like 5% of U.S. GDP passes through our facilities. And really, the thesis going in was to focus on last mile, infill logistics real estate. And that, thesis is obviously playing out here as the market matures and evolves.
Yeah. So starting in 2019, you guys got in just in time for the big COVID disruptions that took place, and you've had a front row seat in the last several years to how this has played out. So wanted to get you, since you've got this kind of expertise and this visibility here to what's happened in the last several years. Can you kind of talk a little bit, kind of set the stage a little bit, give an overview of what the logistics real estate space kind of looks like in 2020 or 2024? I know that there hasn't necessarily been a lot of excess inventory in recent years, but is it any easier to secure space this year than it's been over the last couple of years, and kind of what's happening these days?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that the short answer is it depends. If you were looking for a million square foot building in a secondary, tertiary, market, maybe more of a commodity asset, those are definitely more available than they've been in the past. We've got, a fair amount of supply that's being delivered. But if you're looking for a true last mile infill, irreplaceable location, proximity to, rooftops, they're not making any more of that. So while we do have a moment in time where there's a lot of space being delivered, we're still roughly 200 to 300 basis points below a 10-year historical average from a vacancy standpoint.
Okay.
So it still remains very tight in all size ranges, but what's being built is definitely on the exfill bulky side, where, as I mentioned earlier, our thesis has always been infill, irreplaceable locations. And then in the case of our development portfolio, actually putting Class A state-of-the-art assets in those irreplaceable locations. And we feel really good about that.
I remember doing a story on this a couple of years ago about how difficult it was to stand up a facility just because of the supply chain issues, right? Ironically enough, getting materials, whether it's even things like racking, right? You could build the building, but getting the racking in. Has that eased up a little bit as well? Is it quicker to get buildings up and going, or renovating buildings that you may have that you're updating?
So building materials, including, I'd say power still is an issue. But for the most part, I would say the supply of products that needed to build a building is definitely normalized. Much better than it was during COVID. COVID was definitely a moment in time. But we've normalized in the most part. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember a story one guy told me. He's like, we're building 4 facilities for customers, and the facilities went up, and then we were waiting on a rack system. And they were taking 10 months to get the rack system. The building was done, everything was ready to go, and they just couldn't get the stuff to put in it.
Yeah, we had one of our customers that we'd ask them, what can we do to help you during this time? And they asked, for access to transformers. And the irony is they actually sold those transformers and didn't have access to it. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, interesting times. The other thing that was interesting the last couple of years, that because I think because the e-commerce boom during COVID, a lot of companies took on a lot of space. And then the last year or 2 years, those companies realized, as e-commerce kind of slowed a little bit, right, from the highs that it was at, it's like we don't need all this space anymore, and they were looking to try to sublease some of that excess space. Are you still seeing some of that in the market? And are there any concerns from customers that they potentially may have too much space moving forward
Yeah,
if we don't see a big growth again?
I would say the mantra, I guess, during COVID was we just need to lease it now and figure it out later. And so I think over the last couple of years, they've really sort of figured out what they need. We are seeing a little bit more sublease space hit the market, but I will say sublease space, and the need to sublease always existed. There was a time when landlords were effectively taking any space back that was potentially subleased because you had such a generous mark to market, and you already had several tenants to backfill it right away. So, as developers have brought on new products, so they've already got their own buildings that they need to lease up that are all being delivered, you know, really through the end of this year. That dynamic is shifted where landlords are less willing to take that on today, so they are looking to sublease direct, to tenants. So I do think it is up a little bit, but I don't want to make it sound as if there was no sublease space going on even during the crazy days that were happening. You just weren't necessarily seeing it because landlords were willing to take it back. So,
Yeah.
so what we see today, like, there is hesitancy from our customers in terms of, you know, taking more space. I think, if they can uh, take a smaller building that doesn't require to go all the way to the C-suite, they don't necessarily want to stick their neck out. So a little bit more programmatic about what they need. If they don't absolutely need to take space today, they're okay deferring. Maybe they renew short term. Maybe they take on a couple of smaller facilities in the surrounding area to help satisfy the current demand. But it's definitely a much more conservative, thoughtful, tactical approach that we're seeing from our customers today.
Out of the panic mode, right? That we are in for so long there. It's like it doesn't matter. I have stuff coming in. I need to put it somewhere.
Absolutely. And by
Right.
the way, that feels healthy to me. I don't think, nobody thinks that that was a sustainable period of time.
Yeah.
We are still seeing e-commerce still continues to grow. Is it growing as fast as it was during COVID? No, but we're still, that's there's still that underlying demand that, when you say demand is not necessarily falling off, it's tempered. Like you said, it's more measured in how they're thinking about things. So again, deferring something is different than the demand going away. And I think we're firmly in that deferral stage where folks are, like I said, if they just don't have to make a decision, it's expensive to move. There's still, labor issues. You've got, cost of inventory that's relatively high. You've got a couple of wars going on. You've got a highly controversial presidential campaign. So there's all this level of uncertainty that just makes people say, you know what, maybe we're just better off pausing. We feel good about our the current demand that we have. We feel good about demand going forward, but we'll keep our network relatively conservative for the time being.
Yeah, I think us in the media, and I say us because I'm part of the media as well, and I've probably been guilty of this in the past as well, in that you pick some narrative that sounds really good, like e-commerce is dying, right? Because it dropped
Yeah,
down from the COVID high, and you run with it, right? Because that's getting people interested in talking about it, and yes, I mean e-commerce has slowed. It's not where it was in the middle of COVID, but that because people are in stores, they're still shopping. We're still seeing retail, sales do well. And despite inflation, this things are still, I mean, still seeing sales rise. Right?
absolutely.
So we're not seeing any of that. So that the demand is still there, nonetheless. Shifting gears just a little bit, when you guys talk to customers, and obviously I know you talk to a lot, you have your portfolio, but you're also talking to potential customers, right, that are looking for space. What kind of concerns are on their mind these days? What are they expressing? What are they worried about? Or do they have a lot of issues that they need help solving at this point?
It's interesting because we spend all our time talking about the industrial real estate. It's the four walls and the roof. It's the location of it. It's still on average is 3 to 8% of the overall cost to run a facility. So when we talk to our customers, we largely hear about availability of labor. What are the transportation, ingress and egress out of certain facilities? They're still having a really hard time finding well located facilities. Another thing that hasn't been talked about a lot yet, uh, on the heels of all of this new construction that's being delivered. So today you've got this interesting scenario where builders, there's likely lower rates or some sort of concessions that are being offered today to lease all these big buildings that have been developed, delivered over the last 6 to 12 months. On the heels of that, you have basically zero construction. So we're going to go from a really interesting moment in time where it sure feels like there's a lot of availability, particularly on the bulk side and exfil, like I mentioned.
Mhm.
It's always been tight on the infill side, but you're not seeing any new supply coming out of the ground to support that continued growth going forward. So, I think it's sort of a combination of, do we have the buildings in the right locations? Can we even find a building in the right location? What does our transportation costs look like associated with that location? And do we still have labor to actually efficiently run that location? So, all of those things, plus the shift from just in time to just in case, and now it's really shifting to like you said, kind of a risk off, like a risk management strategy. If we're making sure, like use Baltimore, for example, if you had a facility on the wrong side of the bridge and you need to be on the other side of the bridge, you'd have a
Yep.
real problem with, moving goods back and forth. Whereas, we actually reached out to all of our customers in that scenario and they said, look, no, we had, safety stock in place and multiple smaller locations that, there's always a thought about, if we have some sort of disruption within our network, how are we going to service our customers' needs and our store needs. So I think they've done a really good job over the last couple of years setting up that kind of risk management supply chain model within their network.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about location, right? Because we was talking about, you hear this in consumer market, like real estate's about location, 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 right? Um, every business is different. So every business may need a facility in a different location based on their needs and where their products are going or where their manufacturing locations are located. But I think there probably are still certain areas of this country based on the infrastructure in place, whether it's rail yards, airport, cargo airports, or what have you, where that a facility makes a lot of sense for a lot of businesses. So as you talk about, there's not a lot of new construction and whatnot. Is there still availability in some of these markets? Are there any markets that are just so saturated with facilities at this point that trying to find space in that market is very difficult?
You sort of hit it on the head. I think there is no tried and true one size fits all approach to supply chain. It does matter if it's coming in from a port, and which port. Is it a West Coast port or an East Coast
Mhm.
port? Is it coming by rail? Are you servicing local, regional? Do you have a national model? So all of these things impact where people ultimately decide. I mean, I think from Link's standpoint, our goal was to get as close as we possibly can to as many rooftops with the right infrastructure, meaning access to and from the customer, and that really, in a sense, does open up who can and will lease a space. Because obviously, the value of real estate is tied to the underlying rents. Rents is pure econ 101, supply and demand. You have more tenants that value your building, the rent's ultimately higher. And in the context of rent only being 3 to 8% of your total cost, it's not a meaningful number in the broader operational standpoint. So if we can find and own the right real estate in the right location, we actually have, the efficiency that's built into that location overcomes that we're willing to charge for it. So we spend a lot of time, we've got teams on the ground in every major market. We've got a really sophisticated research and data scientist team that's analyzing all these different physical attributes to try to figure out what is the best location, and where we want to highlight our investments going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to shift gears just a little bit into another topic on this, and I'm curious on how this impacts what you guys do as well. In addition to what I'm going to ask you here, but it is technology and automation. So in many warehouses, we're still, I think, probably in the infancy with technology automation deployment. But I've spoken to a number of people that say every single contract they're signing with a company these days includes some level of automation into a facility. So two questions, I guess. What are you seeing on from customers in terms of their automation deployment? Is interest grow? Is interest continue to go in that area? And I'm just curious, how does that impact facilities as you guys look for facilities and or stand up facilities, renovate facilities? Is automation and robotics technology, et cetera, is that part of your consideration as you guys may look to modernize facilities?
Sure. So no doubt we're going to continue to see more warehouses with automation and robotics. And there's no doubt it's really, really expensive to do that. So,
Yeah.
there's really only 5 to 10% of warehouse users today that are able to take advantage of automation just from a cost constraint standpoint. The other thing we're seeing shift is, these started as very, very specific, use specific inability to adapt robots that, you take them out of that initial environment and they're completely unreusable. Whereas today you're really seeing a lot of um, you know, technology that can basically be reprogrammed overnight, and it's all, very transferable from one location to another. So when I think about like 3PLs, for example, that are using a lot of automation to try to increase efficiency and output, it's a lot easier to spend that money up front or partner with a robotics manufacturer, knowing that, when that specific customer that they're servicing moves on, they can actually repurpose those robots
Mm.
to into another facility. So I think it's definitely coming. It's a consideration for us from a power standpoint. I think we'll continue to hear, availability of power within our buildings to electrify not only the robotics for it or the material handling, but also the EV fleets that are coming down the road to some of our buildings. So it's absolutely a point of emphasis. And Link is a little bit different given our affiliation with Blackstone, that we actually have the ability to potentially finance some of that at a return that makes sense for investors from our side, but also allows us to partner with certain technologies that we believe are forward leaning and that we think our customers can take advantage of along the way.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned EVs in there as well, because I've heard anecdotal evidence from people to say that these companies come in to somebody, whoever owns the facility or whatever, and says, hey, we're going to bring in an EV fleet here, right, because it makes sense and we want to be sustainable. And my next question touches on sustainability, so maybe this fits into that question as well. But what they've run into in some cases is they suddenly start charging up 30 vehicles at night, and there's not enough power left in the facility and in the electrical grid in that facility to run machines. Right. So is
Correct.
that a big concern as you guys look into this, as more customers come and say, hey, we want to add robotics, we want to add automation, we want to add EVs outside they're going to charge? Is there been a lot of work that has to be done in that area? Is that where does that stand?
Yeah, 100%. I think the availability of power, it doesn't exist today, and I think you're seeing a lot of people trying to figure out. We've had several of our customers that were on the forefront of taking on, for example, some of the initial Tesla semis. There was a big groundbreaking. They're all excited. They bring these on and thought, oh crap, how the heck am I supposed to even charge these things? So,
Yeah.
you like Europe, which is no pun intended, but light years ahead of us in this regard. Um, they actually are generally smaller box trucks that workers would take home to their house to charge overnight.
Oh, okay.
We obviously can't charge 53-foot tractor trailers and semis at our homes. So, there's a lot of different and evolving technology around that, and whether it be, charging trailers while they're parked at trailer stalls. Are there excess land or lots that then get turned into charging stations, similar to what you find with like a Tesla charger, a supercharger on the side of a highway somewhere? It's expensive. It's efficiency of a building if you have to park a trailer and a cab at a truck stall for 12 hours. So there's a lot of considerations that need to go into it. I think we're just in the infancy of figuring out the viability and efficiency of having that in mass scale. I think it's definitely coming, but again, it's cost prohibitive, and it does impact the ability of the, like say, the peak operational efficiency of facilities when you've got these trucks that need to sit somewhere and charge for a period of time.
Yeah. Well, I think you know I have discussions about EVs just in general, right? Whether it's EVs in trucks or EV in the automotive world, for consumers and whatnot. And I always say this to people, like, if you expect the solution to be here today, it's not. But if we wait when it's available 15 years from now, we're going to be so far behind, we'll never get there, right?
Yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
we need to start these, and these challenges, if you will, right, are important things that we need to work through, and they'll help us get to an EV future if that's where we decide we want to be as a society. But we need to have these challenges to be able to do that. And if we don't run into these challenges, like like a facility right now, how do you make sure the facility has enough power? Then 15 years from now, when suddenly everything has to be EV, the society is going to shut down. Just that's my little soapbox rant, if you will. But
Yeah. Yeah. And I
you
think,
know,
like, so we at Link, we're trying to do things a little bit differently on that front. We've got our own energy solutions group, where we're actually a program, I should say, where we're taking back the meter, so to speak, and understanding the efficiency of facilities. We obviously have rooftop solar. we've got all these different things we're trying to do from to leverage our scale and the data that we're getting from all these, to whether it be buying power and um, in scale at a discount, if we're able to actually produce solar on our buildings for the tenants within those buildings, all those things that we're working on, to help make an impact, obviously for our investors, but also for our customers that are, they have their own sustainability goals and initiatives. And,
Yeah.
we've host internal, supply chain summits with all of our sustainability teams within our customers. This year we're excited to host, our second annual energy and sustainability summit. It's actually going to be alongside Climate Week in New York City this fall. So definitely doing our best to sort of, like I said, leverage our scale, bring all of those heads together, with all have, stated corporate goals and no real plan to actually execute on those goals. So it's a good opportunity to provide a good think take. And sustainability is just one of those areas that, it's not necessarily a competitive edge or some sort of, you know, strategy that needs to be held to the vest. Everybody's trying to figure all this out together, and we're trying to do our part to provide an arena with our large occupiers to
Yeah.
help each other solve their problems. Yep.
And that is a perfect segue. It's almost like you knew, right? That my next question was going to be on sustainability. So,
Yeah.
you guys have won. To preface it, you've won a number of awards, from workplace honors to technology and innovation awards, and sustainability is a big part of some of this stuff, and what you guys are doing in your logistics portfolio. So, can you talk a little bit more, maybe, about how Link is using data and technology to generate, the sustainability goals that you're trying to accomplish, and also what type of sustainability projects that you guys are seeing the most success with these days?
Sure. So, I guess a couple things. One on the award side, we were Energy Star Partner of the Year for 3 consecutive years. We're the first company in industrial real estate to be honored with that, and it's something we're really proud of. We were also recognized for the 2024 CIO 100 list for our digital customer platform called Link Plus, and
Mhm.
that's basically like a one-stop, digital platform for customers to manage their, whether leases, work orders, it's just sort of anything to do with your facility, access to lease documentation, just trying to make it, obviously a little bit more easy. So that's obviously been well received. And I mentioned we're very data centric within Link. Obviously, you can imagine the data that we have access to when you take 3,000 buildings and 10,000 customers. So, we've built our own proprietary analytics tool. I promised I would not use the word AI, so I'm not. I'm just going to call it machine learning. But it does allow us to make better, faster decisions about, kind of using all these, whether it be a physical attribute data point or, market statistics or, cost of power, cost of utilities, all those things which encompass both, just the underlying business, but also the sustainability aspect of it, and really trying to figure out where we own the right buildings in the right place, or we, like I said, leveraging our scale to help, whether it be, whatever sustainability initiative that our customers are looking for. So, we brought on innovations. We actually have our own kind of innovation think tank within Link that's trying to figure out what's next. We've got some really interesting things and work going on there. I'm not in a position to share at this point, but I think we're definitely aware of the challenges that our problems that our customers face, and we're doing our best to help them solve that.
Yeah. Are there any projects specifically that you guys see great success with?
There's a lot of, sort of the table stakes. Like, for example, last quarter we um, traded out 12 million square feet of, for high efficiency lighting.
Mhm.
Where obviously, rooftop solar is a major initiative, and all the, thousands of megawatts that we're able to generate on the roof. So, I would say it's sort of a combination, like I said, of leveraging our scale, providing an arena for all the thought leaders on the sustainability side to come up with initiatives, as well as like just doing the things we all should be doing. Every building that we develop is LEED certified, and we're following the lead in terms of the level of lead that we need from our customers to be in those buildings. But at the same time, like we're trying to be, a good trusted partner in that regard.
Yep. I think in this day and age, I think majority of companies probably have their own sustainability initiatives. But when you engage with them, your customers, your clients, potential clients, um, does sustainability come up in that conversation? That from their end, are they coming to you and saying, "Hey, what can you do from a sustainability standpoint in this facility?" And if they're not, is that something you bring up with them? How do you broach that and position those conversations?
It's a two-way conversation for sure. I mean, several of our larger national public company, we call them customers, but tenants, they have either, specific items that they want done within the facility.
Yeah.
And then later in that conversation, it turns, it's like, what should we be thinking of? How can we work together on some of the stuff? And again, it's not cheap and it does cost money. It does erode into margins from the customer standpoint. So, these are all things that, first of all, you gotta be able to pay for it. You gotta be able to justify, the return on that. So, as companies become a little bit more challenged, I think those discussions are a little bit harder because when everything was just going up and to the right, top line sales were growing, profit margins were growing, everything was growing. Now, as we're seeing those tighten up just as a national economy, those things are, I guess, being scrutinized a little bit more. I don't want to
Yeah.
suggest that they're not as important as they were before, but the cost is something that does need to be considered. And I think those are really unique one-off conversations that we can have with each of our customers. And we're happy to share some things that are working. Like I said, sort of talking about the electrification of fleets and what they're trying to do to bring in EV charging. Those are things that we can certainly help other customers who may just be starting on that. So, I do think it's safe to say that, even teams with the most sophisticated sustainability groups built in within organizations don't have it all figured out. And I think they'd be
Yeah.
the first ones to admit that. So,
And,
um, yeah,
and you're right. I mean, I saw a survey, and my mind escapes me as to who put the survey out, but it was one of the consultancies, and they had talked about had asked customer companies about their sustainability issues, how they fit, how they're funding them, et cetera, et cetera. And generally speaking, they found that most companies have these sustainability initiatives, but the funding and the effort to try to do them at this point was waning compared to what it was last few years or
yeah.
5 years ago, for instance. And the obviously the idea of concept here was that simply that as margins have shrunk a little bit, the C-suite's looking to not spend as much money, right? Like, so, I mean, so this is an easy way to cut back a little bit and save some cash. You know,
Yeah, and I don't think there's a clear-cut way to do it best either. So totally
which probably
agree.
complicates the whole conversation, right? And what do you do? And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Um, I Final question. I know many in our audience probably have questions regarding the outlook in the space and what you guys are seeing. Will we see new investment in new facilities? Is the market still going to be strong? From, some may be hesitant. You alluded to this earlier. There's a presidential election this year, and in general, election years tend to create uncertainty. I think this one creates a lot of uncertainty as far as what happens. So, in the few minutes that we have left, as my final question for you, would you be willing to share some of your outlook for the space going forward, either near term, over the next few years, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been talking about this moment in time for the last year, knowing that there was going to be these peak deliveries. We're sort of firmly in the middle of all of those actually coming online today.
Mhm.
And I think it's a really interesting moment. As I mentioned before, all these deliveries, there's space available in certain markets and certain size ranges. And then once it's leased up, there's nothing on the heels of that. So, how long is it going to take to chew through a lot of these, new deliveries and the sort of uncertainty and make people feel like they need to start, with a little bit more urgency signing new leases. And I wish I knew the answer to that. We're
Yeah,
obviously still seeing good, healthy demand in certain size ranges and certain submarkets in really every market across the country. So, on a historical standpoint, it still feels very balanced. However, relative to the demand that we saw last couple of years, maybe feels like a step back. The underlying fundamentals for industrial real estate remain really, really strong long term. You talked about e-commerce. Are they growing off of their peak 2021 historical high? No, but you're seeing still persistent increased demand if you go back from like just and sort of level out 2019, the last normal year pre-COVID, to where we are today. There's been incremental growth every single year.
yeah,
We also are seeing a real material impact with, whether it be chip manufacturing, sort of onboarding, onshoring, nearshoring of, chip manufacturers. Those things take time to set up. But there is a huge underbelly of demand that comes from those types of manufacturing facilities and the supplies that are needed to support them. We've obviously seen a huge uptick in demand, in Austin relative to the Gigafactory with Tesla. And as we start to see and bring these other manufacturing facilities online, there's going to see, we're definitely going to see some growth that comes of that. And I think just look, follow the rooftops and the population growth that we're seeing all throughout, the Sun Belt, I said EV battery belt is real, and where rooftops go, warehouse buildings need to go to support the consumption of those growing markets.
Yeah, I think that's something that everybody talks about. Oh, everybody's moving out of the northern, states down south, right? Well, that's great, and that's true. But those people down there need stuff too, right? When they get down there, and
Absolutely.
that changes where facilities need to be because all of a sudden your customer is moving,
Yeah, and
and you
you're seeing, like for example, the Port of Savannah has really blown up from an inbound standpoint. And the West Coast ports, LA Long Beach, for example, has been losing share to East Coast ports for the last 10 years.
yeah,
But by the way, they're actually still growing overall volumes. So it's not to suggest it's going down anywhere. It's actually growing everywhere. It's
right,
just it's growing in the Northeast and the Southeast, those ports, and there's a lot of warehouse space that needs to, support all that new inbound that's coming into those ports.
yeah. Well, I live in the Northeast, so good luck finding space to build them.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, Brandon, thank you so much for your time today discussing this. So much more you could get into. So, if people wanted to get in touch with Link Logistics, maybe to further the conversation, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I guess I'd first just recommend check out our website, linklogistics.com. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn, Brandon Page, Page. There's no I in Page in that one, but be happy to interact with you.
Great. Thank you. Want to thank my guests today, Brandon Page, and all of you that took time out of your day to listen. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure Brandon does as well. New episode of Talking Supply Chain comes out each Thursday. You can find it on scmr.com or wherever you get your podcasts, so be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, this is Brian Straight, and you have been listening to Talking Supply Chain. Talking Supply Chain is produced by Supply Chain Management Review and Peerless Media. You can find it on scmr.com, supplychain247.com, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. For more information on this topic or to sign up for our weekly newsletter, a print or a digital subscription to our publication, visit scmr.com. We hope you will join us for our next episode. For Supply Chain Management Review, I'm Brian Straight, and thank you for listening.